Hello, welcome to another live Google Hangout on the Living Income Guaranteed. And today we will be discussing basic income as basic resources. We usually understand the idea of providing basic income as guaranteeing our human rights, but there's also a myriad of misinterpretations on how it would be just giving money for free and how it would be destabilizing for the economy and even questioning the fairness of providing it. However, we all know that guaranteeing the right to life is something that is even embedded in the Declaration of Human Rights. So why is it that we haven't actually questioned the actual guaranteeing of it through the provision of, for example, a basic income? So to talk about all these topics, specifically also in the US, we have Scott Santens with us, freelancer writer, Reddit moderator of the Basic Income, and he is a fervent supporter of basic income and member of the Basic Income Guarantee Network. So welcome to the Hangout. Hi, Scott.
Hello, my name is Scott, and yeah, I am a moderator of the r/basic income community on Reddit.
And you are in New Orleans, or where are you living?
Yeah. I'm in New Orleans right now.
Okay, cool. So to everyone watching, I'd like to remind you that we have open questions and comments that you'd like to place for Scott or myself throughout the live transmission of this Hangout. Please make sure that you place them through the 40-minute range that we will be speaking through. And so, Scott, without further ado, let's start. First of all, tell us briefly about yourself and how you became an advocate of the basic income.
Yeah, so I've been a Redditor for over 4 years now, and I guess it started as it was a comment on the front page that made it from the Best Of subreddit. And this comment was about how people don't seem to understand just how far we've come in our technology, in our status of technology, and especially when it comes to automation. And we just don't seem to have this understanding of just how close we are to losing a bunch of jobs. And one of the things that really got me was I had never heard of the Rio Tinto robot trucks. And here we have these hundreds of trucks operating already in the mines of Australia, New Zealand, and stuff. And they're just driving themselves. They're just robot trucks doing their stuff. And you know, next there's going to be robot trains delivering this stuff. There's going to be drones being used in these mines. So you've just got all this stuff being automated that people don't even realize that it's going on right now. So people are talking about robot cars and stuff, but they don't realize that there's already automation that is affecting people in a way that they thought was totally off into the future. And seeing this, you know, really got me thinking that we are farther than even I thought that we were. And someone in that particular thread recommended that people read Mana from Marshall Brain. And I took the advice and I found it. It's available like on Kindle for $1 and free for a site. So I just downloaded it and read it. And it's a short read, but it really affected me. It gives two different views of a possible future, and so you've got this first future where basically management is automated first, which is something that people don't really think of as well. People think that the lower jobs are going to be eliminated first. In Mana, it's assumed that actually management goes first because management's the most replaceable, let's say. And you've got this artificial intelligence, you've got this automation software that is able to reduce the workforce there. And people in this first dystopic view, they get put into these giant government warehouses basically for people because there's nothing else for them to do. So they're just fed and they're housed. And it's actually a good take on how people think, well, why don't we just, you know, instead of giving money, why don't we just give people housing and food? So this looks at that and it says, well, okay, here's what might happen. if we just give people housing and food without giving them money for their own choices. And then the second part of this book, it looks at the Australia Project, and this is this project that's basically a resource-based economy that was started in Australia in this book. And of course, things are totally different in here. In Australia, in the Australia Project, everybody has an equal share of the resources available. And because of that, there's just so much more that's possible. And you know, so the first part of Manna is dystopic, and the second part of Manna is utopian. And it's funny how both seem entirely possible, and yet we're currently heading more towards the dystopian view instead of the utopian. And it's just, that's one of the things that gets me, is when people hear about basic income, they think, oh, that's utopian. And it's like, well, if you're choosing between dystopian and utopian, why would you choose dystopian? Don't you want to go for the utopian part? Don't you want to at least try to make things better? And I think that we should. I think that we should strive to make things better.
So let's get then to our actual topic here, which is the understanding of basic income as these access to our living rights. Which have been the main points of conflict that you've encountered when, you know, explaining this idea of providing a basic income as a human right?
I think one of the things, it's a major challenge, of course, is people have this view that the only way to earn an income is to work for it. If you're not working for it, then you don't deserve anything. Now, of course, there's a couple problems with this. It completely ignores all the work that people do that they don't do for money, is a big thing. If you're volunteering, that's ignored. Like, if you look at Wikipedia, it's such a great example where you've got something that's been created for free labor, basically. I mean, some people in the Wikimedia Project are paid, but a lot of people just do this entirely for free. And we've created this tome of knowledge that's far superior to World Book, Britannica. It's totally replaced those. No one thought that would have been possible, but we did it, and we did it because people did it for free. And so people seem to forget all this stuff around them. They were raised by parents who raised them for free. Like, people's parents are not paid to raise good children, and yet they do it, and it's important. All this work that's going on that's not paid is very important. So for one, that's something that people need to recognize, that a basic income will compensate those who currently do work that are currently uncompensated. And you know, that's one part. Another challenge is people think that, you know, if you just get free money, then you'll stop doing all the work. You won't have a job anymore. You'll just stop. And that also is something, it's a challenge we need to get over, and we have the evidence that actually that's entirely not true. We studied this in the 70s, both in the US and in Canada. We looked at it in the American Income Maintenance Experiments, and in Canada, the MINCOME program, and people just didn't stop working, especially heads of households, male primary earners. And this is the 70s too, so they were specifically looking at that kind of thing. And people just didn't stop working. There was a small reduction in work hours, but people just did not quit the labor force entirely. What we did see is that students went back to school, and we saw that new mothers basically created their own maternity leave, paid maternity leave. And so they didn't leave the workforce either. They just stayed home a bit more before returning to work. And that's really the main thing that we saw, even with primary household earners, with men. They just tended to spend a longer time looking for jobs. And I think, again, that points to that, you know, people do want to work, and they're not going to just stop working. They just reduce a little bit. And it's totally under their own control. It's not mandating people work less, whatever. So that's another. We have the evidence, and people just need to understand that it exists. And it's surprising how many people don't know about it. I mean, I didn't know about it. I had no idea about these 70s experiments that were done specifically to look at work disincentives. I had no idea until I started getting into the basic income and studying it. And in studying it, I was just shocked to learn that we knew so much. And yet here we are. We still haven't implemented all this stuff, even though we have this knowledge.
That's something that we usually miss out when we don't actually even have the time at times to investigate further what has been done in terms of solutions. And we are so consumed with seeing all the problems that's why we also do these hangouts, you know, to get people aware and create an awareness of these solutions that have been actually placed several years ago and we had no idea of them. It's not part of our education. Why do you think it's so threatening then, or why haven't we made a broad awareness of these kind of solutions?
It's a good question. I think there's a lot of you've got your religious right, you've got the Christian Protestant work ethic that we're fighting against, and we've got a whole and this is due to the growth of inequality, I think, for decades. When you've got this kind of extreme inequality, it's just so much easier to pair people against each other at the bottom. You've got people, like I remember I was in a bar once and I overheard a conversation, and this person was talking about how he was so upset that he knew somebody who was on disability, and here he was getting the same amount of money that this guy was, and he just thought that was so unfair that somebody could not work and get the same amount of money that he does. And again, it's a perception thing where people look at basic income and they hear about it and they'll think, well, that's just so wrong that people can get paid not to work. We already do that. But we don't do that. What we do is we pay people to not work, but they're getting paid not working. And then when they start working, we take away all that money, so then they're not better off by working. The only way to get rid of that that perverted incentive is to give money to everybody, and then so then when people work and earn extra income, that it's added on top of it. So then there's going to be nobody. There will never be again someone in a bar talking about how someone on their basic income is earning the same amount as they do for working. It would be impossible. If you work in the labor market and you have a job, you're going to earn more than everybody else who doesn't.
Yeah, that resentment we found that is very common, and how nowadays all kinds of welfare is being funded, and how there's usually the working person that says, oh, this immigrant or this person that doesn't work is getting money for free and I do the work. So for sure, you know, the idea of providing a basic income would actually eradicate that kind of social spitefulness and scorn that is created in these terms of, well, I work for my money or I get it as a living right, you know. So
Yeah.
That's why it's so important to continue enforcing this understanding of basic income as a human right. Now, I'd like to get to more in the perspective of the U.S. There's usually the idea that, oh my God, you know, funding a basic income, it would be so much money. What are the usual complaints on affordability, specifically in the U.S., and any other idea that you've encountered that can be actually debunked as well?
Okay, well, first of all, there's a misunderstanding about how much it would cost. A lot of people, when they hear about basic income for the first time, they'll think they'll do their own napkin math, and they'll decide that if you give everybody, you know, $60,000, that, you know, it'll cost just trillions and trillions of dollars, and they'll say, well, that's impossible. I'm like, well, okay, that's not what we're actually talking about. We're talking about giving enough money to cover basic needs, and that doesn't really cost that much. The plan that I advocate is about $12,000 per adult and $4,000 per child. The cost of that program after the elimination of programs that we could eliminate, so food stamps and people on Social Security who are earning less than $12,000 a year, our welfare programs like SNAP, stuff like that, EITC. Once you eliminate all of that and put that into basic income, you're really only looking at a need of about $1.3 trillion. And that is a very doable number. If you look at, say, what we waste on healthcare, we actually, if we had the same healthcare system as Canada, we would save $1.3 trillion. So right now, we're okay with spending $1.3 trillion in wasted healthcare expenses that does not give us better outcomes. Per capita in the U.S. is about $8,000, and we're way above everybody else. If you look at every other country, they're down about 3,000, 4,000, whatever. So we're spending all this extra per person, and we're not getting better results. So I think if you look at it that way as well, that we're currently wasting $1.3 trillion a year. Why don't we not waste it? And why don't we invest it in ourselves? Why don't we invest it in basic income? And if we did that, there you go. That's already covered. Nothing else required. If you look at the military, of course, spends a lot of money compared to every other country combined. And if you could just, and again, if you look at the military as a jobs program too, which it is, it's a way of employing people all over. You've got, let's say, a congressman in a certain state, and they have to make sure that that base stays open because that's jobs. So if that's their focus, if they're making tanks that the military doesn't even want, which happened, somewhat recently, that was in the news. You've got the actual military saying, okay, stop, we don't need tanks, guys. But they're still being made because the congressmen who are in charge of those states, who are representing them, want to keep those jobs. So you have to also see the military as a jobs program, and that's part of the reason why we spend so much as well. And if with basic income you no longer need military jobs program, so there's no longer that necessity to put all that money into the military budget. So again, you can take at least some of that money, and you'd still be, the U.S. I'm sure would still be far above everybody else, but you could take some of that money that you no longer need just to employ people and put it in a basic income. So there's definitely ways that don't even require new taxes, although there's other taxes that really make a lot of sense, like if we institute a carbon tax, that we want to make carbon more expensive. We want to make polluting more expensive. There are taxes that make sense to implement. We could institute a financial transaction tax. We don't want all the speculation on Wall Street. It damages, it can crash the economy. So we want to disincentivize this stuff. So there's certain taxes that we can do that would actually, everyone would agree that we want that to make things work better for everybody. And those make a lot of sense to add as a funding source for basic income. So it doesn't even, people worry about raised taxes and all this stuff, like, oh, yeah, basic income sounds great, but I'm going to pay more for it. Well, that's not necessarily true. Even if you look at a flat tax, where let's say it's a 40% flat tax, you're going to have actually a reduced tax burden on about 60 to 80% of everybody in the U.S. Just because when you pair a flat tax with a basic income, that it becomes progressive. So, and this again is a lack of understanding of how this works. People think of flat tax as regressive. So just if they don't study this, then they just fear it as being an increased tax burden for them. But that's not the case. We can do a lot of stuff that actually will help more people. It can reduce their taxes. And this idea that it will only increase taxes is just incorrect. A basic income will lower taxes for most people.
So we're talking about a general misconception then that actually comes from us not educating ourselves properly on the subject. So that's also why I definitely recommend everyone to also follow Scott's blog, because he also expands on many of these topics there. And that's why we also do this kind of presentation, so that more people can get acquainted with the topic of basic income and see it as a genuine opportunity to actually get out of the myriad of problems that we're facing at the moment. And so I will simply read the comment here from Bella B. She's saying, excellent perspectives. Thanks for your comment.
Thank you.
And I'd like to get now to, we're talking about the systematic aspect, but we are also dealing with human nature and this genuine, unusual fear in relation to something new that is apparently something that has never been done, such as the provision of a basic income. But you made an excellent point before we started the Hangout on how we didn't fear, for example, getting Social Security. So what would you say is required for us as individuals to kind of start getting interested and grasping these solutions? Why is it important?
Okay, well, there's a couple things. I'm just two quotes from two presidents that just immediately come to mind. Is Franklin Roosevelt said, "We have nothing to fear but fear itself," and Kennedy, when talking about the moon, said, "We choose to go to the moon not because it's easy, but because it's hard." And I think we've lost that. In the United States, it used to be important for us to strive to be the best. We wanted to be the best country, and we wanted to show people what was possible. You know, oh yeah, we couldn't go to the moon. It was a crazy idea that we could go to the moon, but we did it. We set that goal and we accomplished it. And with Social Security, we didn't think, okay, this sounds like a good idea, but let's set up a pilot project for Social Security in Los Angeles and maybe somewhere in Iowa, and you know, we'll test things out first before we implement it nationwide, because we don't want to like totally mess things up. We just did it. Roosevelt felt he had to. He was facing the choices, and this was at the time we had like the Huey P. Long movement, Share the Wealth. Huey P. Long was trying to get everybody in the country to, and people were starting up chapters all over the country for the Share the Wealth movement. Every man a king, no man wears a crown. The idea was that everybody in the U.S. would get, he actually wanted a very high basic income. And that was what FDR was looking at. He was looking at, okay, this movement is building, and we've got to figure out a way to do this without doing that. So the solution was to do Social Security. That was a way that people could pay in and then get paid out afterwards. And they just did it. There was no researching pilot projects, all the stuff that people are saying right now. And so here we are right now, and we're facing this choice again. We've got a bunch of people who understand that we've got serious unemployment issues on the horizon, and we've got to start. Even right now, we've got economic problems with a stagnant economy, constantly stagnant wages for decades, growing inequality. These are issues that we have to address, and we've already done the experiments, already have the evidence. I like to point to Alaska a lot, and Alaska really is a great example, because here in Alaska, everybody since 1982 has earned a dividend for living in Alaska as part of being a resident of Alaska. It's their share of the wealth there, and this is something that's it's popular. It's hugely popular in a red state, quote red state. It's a very conservative state. Sarah Palin even gave more money to people. This was not something. It was not seen as a handout. They don't look at it as a handout there. They look at it as their share. And this has been going on where you get, on average, It's been growing since 1982. The most recent one was $1,800 that was just sent out in October. Everybody in Alaska, children included, got the same amount. They all got $1,800. Well, it was almost $1,900 actually, but everybody got this. And over the years, this has been about $1,000 per person. It's varied, and the results of this are amazing. They've got low inequality there, among the lowest in the country. They've got among the lowest poverty in the country. These this especially helps too in the rural areas of Alaska. You don't have, jobs are mostly focused in cities, and so here in Alaska, there's a definite understanding that this income for nothing makes a big difference all over the country. It's actually in the state. It's actually the equivalent of an entire separate industry. It stabilizes the Alaskan economy. It's more money. It spreads things out. It's not just, say, an oil economy. Whereas if the oil economy, which does actually fund the income, but it actually stabilizes the entire state's economy. It drives consumption. People spend their money. They use it to buy whatever, coats, food. A lot of goes into savings. A lot pays off debts. But this actually is a huge stimulus to the Alaskan economy. And I did a blog about this before too, where people worry that giving people free money like a basic income will cause inflation. And it's very interesting if you look at Alaska. Prior to 1982, the rate of inflation, according to the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, it was actually it was higher in Alaska compared to the rest of the U.S. prior to 1982. After 1982, after that, the dividends started. It's been lower ever since. The CPI of Alaska has been lower compared to the rest of the country. So it's hard to look at real data like that and panic and fear. Instead, if you just study it, if you look at Alaska, it makes a huge positive difference. And the people of Alaska, again, they see it not as a handout, but as ownership. It's an ownership, shared ownership of the state of Alaska. I think it's very important. I think that we need to extend that to more states, extend it to more countries. We need to extend this idea that basic income is basic resources. It's stuff that you do own. No one made the oil in Alaska that's sitting in the ground. Nobody did that. It's just sitting there. So when the oil companies come in and drill for it and then sell it, that's great. They added value to what was in the ground, but they did not make the oil. That oil was already there, and therefore this oil that was already there should be seen as being owned by everybody. It's either owned by everybody or by nobody.
That's something that we absolutely agree on, and we actually propose that with this entitlement of the natural resources and the profit made from the companies that actually produce them and extract them and that we actually consume anyways, should be part of what funds the provision of a basic income, a living income. And so in that, we are not getting it for free, of course, because we are all entitled to the use of our natural resources because we're human beings, because we require them to live. So I fully agree on that aspect of reminding ourselves and more so becoming acquainted with this solution from the actual facts, which is what you just explained. And this should be then part of what we should all also talk about, because spreading the word is precisely what's required. More so when people tend to focus so much on the crisis aspect and not really looking at what has been done and what is currently working. We have some comments by Valdir Pimentel. He's saying, it's been shown that social behavior campaigns are more effective if they try to implement certain specific actions than if they try to make people to buy into the values that would then lead to the values, think recycling. Similarly, a basic income would be in itself a motor for change in how people view income and the right to life, because they would be practicing it. Trying to change the mindset first is hard because the current system reinforces it. And
Yes.
that also leads on to the question that I also had for you, which is precisely this. How are people grasping this concept in the US specifically, and also within the containment of capitalism, and how basic income wouldn't really debunk or undermine the current capitalism, but actually would enhance it? What's your perspective on all of this?
Well, again, I think that ties right into what we were just talking about with Alaska. First of all, that in Alaska too, it wasn't that they didn't sell the idea to people. It wasn't that they tried to get people to see money in a different way before they gave out the dividend. They just gave out the dividend. They already had the Alaska Permanent Fund, and they actually viewed of making sure that government didn't waste the money, and wanted to make sure that fund lasted. So they decided to just give the part of the dividend back to the people as a way of making sure that people maintained this. And so they didn't change any perceptions first, they just did it. But now after the fact, after they've done this, and after it's been on for decades, the people in Alaska feel it's an ownership thing. It's that they feel that there's no taking away their dividend because it's theirs. They're owed it. Look at it as free money or a handout. It is money that they deserve. And I think it happened because they just have it. They've had it for so long that they just get it that way. And again, that's exactly why I think that's a good step forward, is that the more states do this, the more countries do this, the more that they start giving out money to people just in any way as a share of anything, in any program. Just we need to get people money for nothing. And when that happens, people are going to start looking at it differently. And that's it. That is definitely a real and positive, doable step forward.
Absolutely.
It doesn't even have to be large amounts.
And what about the mindset aspect that Baldir is also mentioning? And he places the source of this claim in a YouTube video. Thanks for that. About the mindset aspect, which is, as you were mentioning before, also the fear of doing something new.
I'm sorry, what? Well, do you have a question?
Yeah.
Or just more about...
Yes, it's about the mindset of the individuals, or essentially people that get into fears of how will this affect me, or will I have less? And you mentioned something that's very key in the US, which is the idea of red state and this usual association with communism or else. So how can you say that basic income is actually a way to create capitalism 2.0, as you mentioned, or as we say, perfecting capitalism? I think he froze, or his internet dropped. So let's see if he is able to listen. For everyone watching at the moment, we are on a live discussion, so if anyone else wants to place comments, questions, let's see if Scott is able to get back on. So, as a reminder to everyone as well, we will be placing links to all of the places where Scott is usually contributing to. He's got a very active Twitter page with all things related to basic income, and also on the Reddit subreddit. And he's got his own project, which I'm going to ask him about. It's called the Big Patreon Creator Pledge, wherein he is actually aiming at funding his own basic income through sort of like crowdfunding process. And so he's finally dropped. So for now, we will simply continue basically on reinforcing something that he also said, that is that we as people in the world tend to look at, for example, the US as an example of an economy that we should aim at following or getting the primary example of what can be done and how that has been lost. So I would say that this is a cool way to also, as people specifically in America, to realize that right now there's a lot of reinforcement on looking at the problems, only getting very apathetic in terms of politics as well, and how with this awareness and with what Scott has shared, it is genuinely an opportunity to realize what has been done also in the US itself, specifically Alaska, as he was mentioning, and how that could be implemented if people start talking about it and sharing about it as well, because that is what we have found is mostly the way to go easing out all of the fears that come from believing that, how will this free money affect the economy, or they will get money for free. But in capitalism, it really doesn't make sense that we are creating an economy based on the ability to consume, but if there's not enough money for that, obviously you get the crisis that is ongoing right now. So what Scott was mentioning actually makes perfect sense in how, if you really want to get to that previous position, specifically talking about America, of being a first world country and eradicating poverty, inequality, and the various nefarious aspects of the system, such as, in my perception, military, for example, rather spend that money on a basic income. So, Scott, we lost you for a while, but...
Sorry about that.
Yeah, we know that your internet is not that stable at times, so it's fine.
Yeah, we need basic internet too. Internet should be a right that doesn't cut out.
Exactly, and quality internet also for third world countries like myself. So let's get on to discussing the basic income movement in the US and your participation in the basic income guarantee network, because we don't have as much clarity in terms of what is it really about. Is it a petition? Is it intended to be a political movement? How is it aimed at being implemented, or what's the purpose of it?
Well, the basic income network really is just, in the US, it's US big, and anybody can join it. I can put up the link there too. It's just, you get added to the list, you get the newsletter, and you're connected to this growing movement, and it really is recently. Now, again, I'm only somewhat recently new to it. I just got in, last fall, really. This for 10 years, 20 years, whatever. When there are people who are part of the Basic Income Earth Network, in which you is the chapter, something that's been moving for decades. There were people that saw this far in advance. Carl Widerquist is someone who I think is very important to the movement, and he's been a part of this for a long time. And I think it's amazing that someone can be so far ahead of the times, I would say. And we're only just catching up right now, and there's still, even just people right now like myself who are just getting into it. We're still ahead of where this is going, and so we've got to get out there and start pushing. We've got to start pushing the movement forward. And a big catalyst for all of this was Switzerland. Switzerland came out.
Okay, you're freezing again, if you can hear me. So the internet is not cooperating at the moment. Okay, in the meantime, I'm going to read Mats Bjornstid's comment. He's saying maybe we could have a chat with someone who is against the basic income sometime. sure, Mats, we're going to consider. If you know someone, please let us know, and I will gladly ask them to come in and share their perspectives of why it doesn't make sense to provide our access to human rights. I definitely would like to have that kind of conversation.
Yeah,
Go ahead,
it would be
Scott.
interesting.
Yes.
Yeah, so I was saying that the Basic Income Earth Network has been, they've been organizing, there's been meetings, conventions for years, and just now there's more interest in these. There's more interest because successful movements on the world stage. The entire world basically is looking at an economy that just isn't working for everybody. You've just got all these benefits being cut all over. You've got less money being spent on people, and you've got more money being concentrated at the top, and you've got slowing economies because of it. You've even got this was a warning that came out recently from I believe it was the Standard & Poor's, said, okay, well, apparently we've reached too extreme a level of inequality. It's bad for the economy. We're depressing GDP, and that's exactly what we're looking at. We need to leverage the multiplier effect. Is another big thing. People need to understand that better. Some people actually think it doesn't exist, which is kind of silly to me. But if you look at, we know that when we give more money, when we give money, $1 to the bottom, that it helps the economy much more than giving $1 to the top. You're going to get different numbers out of this, but it's around, say, if you give a dollar to somebody with millions of dollars, it's going to add about 40 cents to the economy. And if you give $1 to someone at the bottom, it's going to add $1.20. You've got this effect where the money at the bottom does even more than you're putting into it. It just makes sense economically speaking to make sure people at the bottom get that. And again, that's the basic income. It's when you give enough to cover their basic needs. Everybody needs to spend money on food. Everybody's money on shelter. This money that's the very basic is immediately spent. It's not saved. No one's going to decide to save up money to buy a yacht in 10 years instead of eating on a daily basis.
Exactly.
So it just doesn't make any sense. It helps the economy, and I think it's going to be more clearly visible. I think that this just makes sense. You've got people talking about helicopter drops now, but even just printing some money, like if we did the quantitative easing, just saying, okay, well, we printed out this money and it didn't really do much. Not only did it not cause inflation, rampant inflation, when we printed out, basically it was about $5 trillion here in the U.S. and we printed out $5 trillion and we gave it to the bank in order to lend out to people. It does sense that we said, okay, we want it to get to people's hands, but we can't just give it to them, so we're going to give it to lend. To start giving money to people at the bottom directly. They're going to help the economy.
Okay, you're breaking off a little bit there. We're getting the main idea there. It's a shame that it's breaking off. Maybe you can turn off your camera as well. Maybe that can solve the bandwidth problem. And I definitely agree on that aspect, because we tend to have this idea that lending money to people is the way to reactivate the economy. It doesn't make sense, because we know where people are landing without having access to, for example, just buying a house. They are losing their homes now with this whole revaluation and financial system, which is a whole other topic in itself. We lost you for a little bit there. But it obviously then makes sense not to lend that money through banks and the whole usury process, but actually give it directly as a basic income and actually dodge the whole process of having to go through the banking system to do that.
Right. There's no need for a middleman. If you look even, and this is actually, it's a good possible, very doable step, is that you could actually, if we wanted to go this, use this strategy, you could look at universal food stamps. Food stamps are actually the best stimulus that we have. We've seen that the multiplier effects for food stamps are actually like around $1.50 for every dollar. Or more. I've seen studies that show even as much as almost $2, about $1.80 or so, for every dollar spent on food stamps. So if you really wanted to stimulate the economy, and this is also because everybody has to eat, and food stamps doesn't cover it even enough. It covers for about 3 weeks on average for people. It's not even a full month's worth of food. If you give everybody 3 weeks worth of food, all that's going to be spent, it's going to go right into the economy, and it's going to boost it. And this is a way where I think it'll be easier for people. They're not as worried about, oh, we can't just give people money for nothing. Well, you're just giving them the ability to stay alive. And when you got an economy that isn't working for everybody, I think that would make a huge difference. It would stimulate the economy. Exactly. And it would also just be a step forward. People would say, oh, we can do that, and it'll make a big difference.
We have a question, we're wrapping up also this hangout. Gabriela Seves is saying, I believe that the main resistance is that there is no real understanding of where the money is going to come from, and within this, if that money is going to be generated by the people who is currently having a job in the system. I believe that the main, he just replied it. So yeah, once again, it is the whole idea of, oh, where is that money coming from? But if we do get into the actual nitty-gritty details of how money is just created out of nowhere and there's no real backing to it, why don't we actually take the decision to make new rules in which we just use that money as the best way to guarantee our access to our living rights? You know, there's no God saying, oh, it must be this or that way. We actually have the power to decide, isn't it? What's your perspective?
Yeah. And well, okay, so when it comes to where the money is going to come from, I personally, I don't think that we should print out $3 trillion a year and give it to everybody. People are going to be afraid of that, and it's going to hugely inflate the money supply. It's not really something that anyone is serious about doing. What people are serious about doing is giving people, say, a few $100s a year of printed money, and that in itself would be an economic stimulus. And it's not something we would want to do forever, but it would stimulate the economy. So it's one way of where the money comes from, we just print it and it works. But as far as going for a full basic income, let's say $12,000 a year, where that money is going to come from, there's a lot of different options. And I wrote an article about this before called Why Should We Support the Idea of an Unconditional Basic Income? And in that article, I discuss the different various options. And there are a lot of options. You can look at a land value tax. It makes sense. And estimates vary as to how much that would bring. But one estimate is $1.7 trillion is like an average estimate of how much you could get from that. And again, $1.7 trillion is all we need. We just need $1.3 trillion to add up to the removal from all other services in order to do that. And a land value tax also, I just think, makes sense economically. If you look at the reasoning for this and why it would make sense, it really does make sense. It's another example where you'd basically be lowering taxes for people who, let's say, if you own a building, your taxes are going to be lowered. And if you have a plot of land with nothing on it, especially if like you're in a residential neighborhood and you've got an empty lot and all these houses are built around it, and you're just sitting on it waiting for the value to go up so that you can sell it. You can't do that as easily with land value tax. It would cost more. So it's a way of evening this out, where it's going to cost less for some people and cost more for other people. And the taxes that would be generated from this could pay for it. And so again, there's a lot of different funding methods. And it's really just a matter of choosing. Put it to the people. Let them vote. Decide which makes more sense. Would you rather have a flat income tax? Would you rather have a land value tax? Would you rather have carbon taxes? Would you rather have transaction taxes? There's a lot of different ways. And again, like the Alaska model, that too is a way of funding it. I read this paper, it's a very interesting paper about exporting the Alaska model to other states. And you look at this, and how would it work in a resource, a place like Vermont is what the example that it uses. How could you do this with a resource poor state? So they don't have a bunch of oil. How would you do this? Because people think, well, Alaska, the only reason they could do that was because they've got all this oil. Well, okay, you can actually don't even need oil to do this. There's a whole lot of different resources you can look at. Like one of the examples is water. So you look at, you've got, let's say, Coke, and they're drilling up water out of the ground from the water table, and they're packaging it and they're selling it, for $1.50 per bottle, whatever. And they got this water for free, and they're in these states. They're actually using over 90% of the water, and they're no matter how much water they use, they're not charged for it any more than anybody else. So why do we allow that? Why don't we just say, okay, if you're going to use more than X amount of gallons, you need to pay an extra fee for that. And if you take that fee and put it in a fund, just like Alaska does, combine it with other things as well, then you've got yourself a citizen income there as well. In Vermont, it was estimated that this is just a state level, that you could get as much as Alaska on the low end, and you can get up to $10,000 on the high end. So it would be possible, theoretically, for every citizen, every resident of Vermont to be right now earning $10,000 a year just for living in Vermont. And we could do that anywhere. We could fund it that way as well. There's just so many different ways of funding this. It's just a question of what's more popular with people. And I think the best way to do that is with the democratic process.
Absolutely. We also agree that this eventually obviously has to be a political movement and a political decision that we have to vote on. And what I would like to rescue from all of this is that there are plenty of ways to actually do it. So we have to get rid of the idea that, oh no, it can't be done, oh no, there's not enough resources, oh no, that's unfair. And so with all of these facts that you've shared here today, it makes sense. It's just something that makes sense. It is best for everyone. It would benefit the economy. Why are we not doing it? So here I would like you to say like your final words for everyone watching. Why do you see this as an imperative point to do research on and actually start advocating for as the basic income?
I mean, I think there are so many reasons to support this. The more you look into it, the more sense it makes. In Carl Wiederquist's book, he talks about independence, populism, basic income. And basic income is a way of really providing freedom and liberty. It's a way of freeing people to say no. Until people can say no, then they're being coerced, they're being forced. That's what the system we have right now. And so this is the way of looking at it that's been existing for decades, is that for the longest time, we've been forcing people to work. They have no choice. And this system that creates huge inequality, that forces people to do work that they feel is personally wrong, they're forced to do it. And so you've got this more of a libertarian viewpoint that totally supports it, and you've got, if you look at automation in the future ahead, it's just we're gonna need it even more. If you care about inequality, this is something that will reduce inequality. There's just reason after reason after reason to support it, and we need to do this. And I would encourage everybody out there to look into this. Join us on reddit.com/r/basic income. This is a great central location for information. And I'd also welcome everybody to take my big Patreon creator pledge, which I have a page at patreon.com/ScottSantons. And there you'll see that I've set up a pledge where you too can do what I'm doing. and that's try to spread the word and create videos, create images, create articles. And with Patreon, you can hopefully gain some patrons from this and start earning your own basic income and use that basic income to push for others to get their own basic incomes. And I think that's, as long as we all start really doing our part to do this, to start really talking to people, studying, sharing, just do everything you can, because this is something that needs to happen, and it's going to increasingly need to happen.
I agree with that, and we also encourage everyone to share this video if you agree with what Scott has explained as well, because this is also a great way to get people into an actual conversation. We've discussed about the pros, the cons, and debunking the notion that it doesn't make sense or that it would be controversial or counterproductive for the economy. That's all simply nonsense, and it has to be realized for the common sense that it is to provide the right to life to everyone. So Scott, thank you very much. We will leave links for all of the aspects and articles that Scott has mentioned in the information box of this Hangout. Thank you for being here and for your time.
Thank you.
And thank you, the viewer. We will be then returning next week at the same time with another live Living Income Guaranteed Hangout. And thank you until next time. Bye, Scott.
Bye-bye.